Sing, goddess, the anger of Achilles, Peleus' son. Or maybe not so much anger and more sort of petty spitefulness or spiteful pettiness. So I finally got around to reading the Iliad by Homer, one of the foundational texts in Western literature. So I've been reading a lot of ancient Greek and some Roman literature lately, mostly because it's sort of the foundation that I feel like I need, because I read a lot, but a lot of the allusions and references and stuff are not totally lost on me, but I don't fully appreciate them. Certainly not as much as I do or would now, having read stuff like the Iliad. So this is a Greek poem written by Homer, who probably wasn't an actual guy. It was probably more of an oral tradition that was finally put to paper or parchment or whatever they used to write stuff on in the probably around 750 BC. So very, very old, over 2,700 years. The events it covers is a late Bronze Age battle / war, which took place in the maybe 1200s or 1300s BC. So even older, like 500 years after the events of the war, it was finally written down. Now, there probably was an oral tradition in between those 500 years, but the poem itself, the book itself, is not historical. It's, you might say, historical fiction. I think I would say historical fiction. It takes place in a setting that is real, and it involves a war which, from the archaeological evidence, we sort of believe to be real, and I believe to be real. So there was a war between the Greeks and the Trojans, and I like to think, there's probably no way to ever find out if this is true, but I like to think that a lot of real life events and real life characters during that war made their way through oral tradition and histories passed down and became part of what we now have as the Iliad. So going into this, my idea of what the Iliad was is that it's a sort of a 10-year war, Greeks going to war with the Trojans, and in the end the Trojans set up this horse and managed to take over the city. That's not really what the Iliad is. The Iliad is a poem in 24 books. It's quite long, but it only covers, I don't know exactly, but a handful of days. It's not actually as wide sweeping as a 10-year war or a 10-year siege. In terms of the verse itself, it really struck me, the descriptions of battles and fights. I found that a lot of it and a lot of the tropes and the characters reminded me so much of a lot that I've read in fantasy, which I think is kind of the only genre where you see a lot of hand-to-hand combat and heroes and characters like that, which I guess makes sense that this is so foundational and it has influenced so much, if not directly, then sort of in a lineage dating from the time of Homer up to the modern era, where people are still describing fight scenes and battle sequences and characters fighting, and the heroes themselves, like Ajax, the son of Telamon, this like great big bulky guy. You can sort of imagine what he's like. And then you got Odysseus, who is the super strategic, very wily, but like a great fighter as well. And Agamemnon, the sort of the king, who, there's lots of kings, but he's sort of the leader of this whole tribe of Greeks. And his brother Menelaus, who's also quite strong, but sort of plays second fiddle to Agamemnon. And Teucer with the bow, and the other Ajax, because there's two Ajaxes. Ajax sort of the greater and the lesser in sort of terms of statue. I don't think they use the terms greater and lesser. That's just how I imagine them in my head. And of course Achilles, the sort of main character, as it were, the greatest hero and the greatest of all these people. And then on the other side we have Alexander, or Paris as he's called, and Hector, his brother, and numerous others, but those are the sort of the main ones that stand out to me. But they each have their own sort of individual strengths and weaknesses and personalities that sort of make them tropes. I guess they're not tropes in this, but over time, over the past 2,700 years of literature, tropes have sort of grown from them, and they seem to embody these tropes because I imagine these tropes were based on these characters. And Diomedes to me is one of the coolest people in this book, on the Greek side certainly. So the story starts with the Greeks, or as they're called in this book, the Achaeans, sometimes the Danaans, sometimes also the Argives, although the Argives is sort of more specific of people from Argos. But the Achaeans is sort of the people from the area of Achaia that's much larger than that, and then Danaans, I guess, is all of them. Hellenes is only used once or twice, very briefly. I think that's really interesting. I think Hellenes is this sort of specific area in the north, the Peloponnese. And I think it's interesting that when we think of classical Greece, we think of the Hellenes. But that term, at this point, whether during the Archaic period when Homer had written this down, or this is a reflection of the late Bronze Age where the term Hellenes was not used. It was the Achaeans. Anyways, the Achaeans have been camped on the shores of the Hellespont outside of Troy for 10 years now, or 9 years, I guess. They're in the 10th year. And the 10 years seems a bit strange to me. It doesn't feel like they've actually been there for 10 years. They have sort of a camp set up near their ships on the beach. They don't have a wall or a ditch or any sort of fortifications. They do during the course of the events of this book, but but if they had been there for 10 years, surely they would have set them up beforehand. Now, they have captured and sacked a few surrounding cities, allies of Troy, but they haven't been able to crack the nut that is Troy just yet. Troy is defended by Hector, the son of Priam, who is this very heroic character. Probably my favorite character in the book. I think Hector is the most noble and the most honorable, and like, to me, he's the coolest. Diomedes is a close second. And then I guess I should back up even further and be like, why are these two people at war? Why have the Achaeans traveled all the way across the Aegean Sea from Greece to Troy, which is in northeastern Anatolia, like I said, right near the Hellespont? Well, it's because this guy Alexander, who was a Trojan, went over to Argos, met up with Menelaus and Agamemnon. Agamemnon's the king of the Argives, and Menelaus is his younger brother. And Menelaus had a wife named Helen, and Alexander, also known as Paris. When he saw Helen, he fell in love with her to the point that he grabbed her, captured her, and stole her away to be his wife, which in this context kind of means sex slave. She has no agency in this. She laments and wishes that she had died rather than have been taken away. She constantly wants to go back to her family and back to Argos. But yeah, Paris has taken her away. And so Agamemnon, king of the Argives, manages to get all the Greeks, all the Achaeans to band together and travel to Troy to besiege it, to sack it, and to get Helen back. And it's interesting, there's a couple lines that sort of hint that there was sort of a war tax, that if you refused to go with Agamemnon, even if you were not part of his, like, not empire, but his sort of kingdom, his petty kingdom of a few city-states, you had to pay him sort of a war tax. You had to give him things in exchange. Say, I'm not going to the war, but here, I'm going to pay for the war effort. So it's sort of, it makes the political situation quite interesting, because there are all these different kings at Troy, all these different kings of the Achaeans. Like Achilles is a king, Diomedes is a king, Ajax is a king, Agamemnon is a king, but Agamemnon is sort of the main one. He's not the lord over everyone, but he's the most preeminent king, and so the others kind of defer to him in most things. So they've been sieging Troy for almost 10 years now. It's mentioned a few times that Troy had been a very, very rich city, but after the course of the war over the 9 years, it's depleted its treasury, right? Trying to support itself and its allies. It's summoned a whole bunch of nearby allies from all over Anatolia, and there's a whole bunch of non-Trojan people within the walls of Troy helping defend the Trojans and fighting the Achaeans. But our story starts with a plague ravaging the camp of the Achaeans, and they consult the oracles and they find out it's Apollo is cursing us with this pestilence because one of Apollo's priests, a Trojan, had come to the camp and asked for his daughter to be ransomed. His daughter had been captured in one of these raids, and she has become a sex slave of Agamemnon, and he is refusing to give her up. And so because of that, Apollo is cursing them with this plague. They have a big meeting and they agree that yes, we have to give this girl up. And Agamemnon is like, whoa, 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 she was my prize. I got the first pick because I'm the best king. I picked this girl. How come I have to give her up now? And so he says, well, then I'm going to take one of your girls as a replacement, because everyone got a girl out of this, and now Agamemnon has to give his up. That's not fair. So he's taking someone else's, and kind of like a little hissy fit. And of course Achilles jumps up and he's like, who do you think you are going to take one of our prizes just because you have to give yours up? That's not fair. And then Agamemnon says, well, guess what, I'm going to take yours. So Agamemnon takes this girl Briseis, who had been this sort of sex slave of Achilles, and takes her for his own. And Achilles goes into a fit and rages on about, he sort of Marxist on me really picked up on this, how Agamemnon, all he does is sit behind the lines. He doesn't actually do anything. All the other people go out and do all the work and all the raiding, and then they get all the loot back, and then Agamemnon gets to take his pick out of it. He's like the sort of the capitalist that doesn't do any work but reaps all the benefits. And Achilles is going on and on about this, and he's like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not fighting for you anymore. If I'm not going to get to keep my prizes that I win with my hard work, you're going to take it all, then there's no way I'm going to fight for you. Why would I ever want to fight for you? I'm done. And so thus the sort of anger of Achilles, which is what this whole poem is about. Now I say anger, but to me it feels like spitefulness. Like, you're taking my toys away, I'm not going to fight anymore. So the whole thing is just because his sort of sex slave was taken away. Now you could do a sort of a modernist adaptation of this and make it out that Achilles and Briseis are like in love, where she had been captured and he decided to take her so that none of the others could take her, and because he wanted to sort of save her from slavery, and then they fall in love, and then Agamemnon takes her away from him. Like, you could run it like a love story, but the text itself, it's definitely not a love story. It doesn't feel like a love story, although at the end it's sort of revealed that Achilles wants to make her his wife. Again, does she have agency in this? And I think she sort of, we do get the vibes that she sort of does want to be with Achilles at the end of it, but again, consent in late Bronze Age Greece who knows? So like I said, this sets up our plot where the Danaans, or slash the Achaeans slash Greeks, are fighting against the Trojans, but Achilles and his Myrmidons, which is sort of his army that he's brought with him, a couple thousand dudes, they're refusing to fight. They're just sitting by the boats, letting the others fight and die. And Achilles, in his rage, he cries to his mom, who is Thetis, this sea goddess, says, "Mom, it's not fair. Could you go up to Zeus and tell Zeus that I want all the Achaeans to lose and make all the Achaeans die and lose their battle until they get so desperate that they need my help. And then they'll see how much they need me." It feels like a very sort of petty teenager, like, I'm not going to play anymore. And then when you guys are losing, and then you want me to play, then I'll come in and save the day, which is the whole plot of the thing. And that's exactly what happens. So the Achaeans under Agamemnon go out to fight the Trojans. The Trojans come out of their wall. They have a big fight, and it keeps going back and forth. And we have really epic moments with our epic characters doing epic things. I keep using that word because this is literally an epic. And the gods get involved, which is really cool. We've got, on the side of the Achaeans, we've got Athena, who's always referred to as gray-eyed Athena, which I think is really cool. And Hera, who's often referred to as Hera of the White Limbs, I guess because she's really pale because women didn't really get out much. Or ox-eyed Hera, which I like to think in my mind means more like a doe-eyed Hera, we would say. We've also got Neptune, who's on their side because he had built the walls of Troy, but then never got paid for it, so he's kind of mad. Hephaestus kind of joins in on the side, helping out Thetis, Achilles' mom. And then on the side of the Trojans, we have Apollo, Aphrodite, because of course she loves Paris, and Ares, god of war, and also Zeus. Zeus is sort of on the side of the Trojans in that he's fulfilling Achilles' mom's wish to push the Danaans back, push the Greeks back, so that they can feel so bad that they don't have Achilles helping them. There's lots of really cool sort of historical things that I didn't know about the late Bronze Age or the Archaic Greek Age, depending on whether we're talking about things that actually happened in the 13th century BC or things that happened when this was written down in the 7th century BC. Things like the value of tripods. Tripods are super, super valuable. And then when I say tripod, I'm not talking about the thing you put your camera on. I'm talking about these giant brass bowls with 3 legs that you would set over a fire to heat things up. Those are constantly being brought up as prizes for things or loot in war. Also, how that anytime someone kills someone in battle, they immediately want to start stripping their armor off and taking their armor off as a prize, which I guess makes sense in a society where metal and bronze are so valuable, and also kind of as a prize to say, look, I beat this guy, I got his armor. But they will literally, in the heat of battle, kill a dude and start stripping his armor off while the battle's still going on. And then others will rush in and try to get their comrade's armor back, and kind of crazy. Also really cool is that just about every single dude that gets killed in these battles is named. There's no main character running off, shooting a bunch of arrows, killing a whole bunch of dudes, and then stabbing a bunch of dudes. And almost everyone is named. He killed this person and this person, who was the son of this person, and this person who did this, and this person who had a kid back home, and this. A lot of the backstory of these sort of random dudes that get killed is filled in, which is super, super cool. It makes it feel much more like everyone's a hero and everyone matters. Whereas in modern depictions of hand-to-hand combat, there's so many unnamed soldiers just getting killed left, right, and center. It's almost like everyone knows everyone. And the fact that these names have been passed on tells me that, authors can obviously make up names for their characters, but to make up so many of these names, I wonder if the author had done it as a sort of a way to make the poem universal, have characters from all sorts of different towns and cities and areas of this sort of world, so that the poem would be popular all over the place. If you write a song all about your hometown, nobody's really going to care about it outside of your hometown. But if you write a song that talks about all 52 of the different states of America and how they're all great, well, then everyone in America is going to love that song, that sort of thing. So we've got characters from all over the place being named as both heroes and both as victims. Another thing I love about the actual verse itself is the amount of metaphors that they have. There's so many comparisons and imagery that I can visualize sort of the fight happening, and then a lot of the comparisons are with animals or with nature, and I can almost visualize not them changing into these animals, but as a film, our sort of battle or our characters' action happening, and then sort of fade out and then fade in this metaphor scene of nature or animals or whatever, and then fade back out and go back to our battle sequence. I'm going to see if I can find an example. Patroclus stood close and stabbed him with the spear on his jaw's right side, driving it through his teeth, then hoisted him with the spear and dragged him over the chariot rail, like a man who sits on a jutting rock and drags a sacred fish out of the sea with line and glittering bronze hook. So Patroclus dragged Thestor gaping from his chariot on his shining spear and thrust him down on his face, and his life left him where he fell. So you could almost picture stabbing this guy in the face with his spear, and then as he's pulling it up, it kind of fades into a fisherman pulling up fish out of a lake or something, and then it fade back to him pulling the guy up with a spear, that sort of thing. Or here's another one. As when a lion gets in among a herd and kills a bull, a great spirited gleaming beast among shambling cattle, and it dies bellowing under the lion's jaws, so the captain of the shield-bearing Lycians died raging and called out to his dear companion. So you could imagine a scene with a bull sort of lying on the ground and a lion on its neck, and the bull's like crying out, and then sort of fades, and it's this guy Sarpedon down with Patroclus at his neck with a spear. Another thing that's really cool is that a lot of the characters are described wearing animal skins, which really gives it a super archaic vibe, that there are sort of clothes and linens and robes and whatnot, but a lot of the time they're just wearing like ox hides and lion skins and stuff like that. It really makes it feel like a much older world than even sort of classical Greece. But anyways, our plot is fighting back and forth between Troy and the Achaeans, and the gods keep getting involved, and Zeus has to tell them, stop getting involved. Look, fate and destiny has set this all up. It kind of spoils the ending, but I imagine everyone would have known this story. Everyone knows what's going to happen. But it is revealed in the poem exactly what's going to happen, because Zeus says, look, this is fate. This has to happen. This is going to happen. So you gods getting involved one side or the other, there's no point. Stay out of it. You're just causing mischief. But the gods still sneak in and sort of, they never reveal themselves. Well, they do reveal themselves to the mortals sometimes, but they always take the form of someone that the character would know. So like Achilles would be standing there, and then his buddy would show up, but it wouldn't really be his buddy. It would actually be someone like Athena and would talk to him, but he would see it as his sort of his buddy Jonathan. I don't know. But that made me feel like, I wonder if a lot of time in ancient Greece, people would or say that they had met the gods, or someone was possessed by the gods, and that's how the gods revealed themselves, was through other people, and it wasn't actually that person, it was actually a god. And they use the gods as an excuse a lot of the times. Like, we'll get to it when Agamemnon really does it, but anytime they fail at something or they're losing a fight, it's because Zeus is against us. It's not our fault. It's because the gods are against us. Which, a lot of this has explicit them sacrificing to the gods and asking the gods for help, and the gods just straight up saying, like, no, we're not helping you. It's not fated, or sorry, I'm helping the other guy who's also sacrificing. Which makes me think, like, what did people actually think because this society sacrificed to the gods all the time, right? But wouldn't they realize, like, well, also the enemies are also sacrificing to the same gods in this case? I don't know if in historical Troy they also worship the same gods as the Achaeans, as the Greeks, but even reading this, when they're like, hey, remember in the Iliad when they sacrificed to Zeus, and Zeus was like, I'm not dealing with you. Why do we still sacrifice to Zeus? Because what if he just says no? What's the point? I don't know. That could be a whole rabbit hole. Anyway, this climax of the story is when, just according to petty Achilles' wishes, the Achaeans get pushed all the way back to their ships. They're thinking of getting on their ships and leaving. Even after almost 10 years, they're like, look, they're going to start burning our ships. We got to leave. And Patroclus, who's like Achilles' best man, they are like the ultimate bros, which representation matters, and I appreciate that they have this platonic love interest between these two dudes that love each other so much and will do anything for each other, as like the ultimate bros, the ultimate bromance. Patroclus is like, look, Achilles, if you're going to sit there and mope, no, he doesn't come on to them that hard, but he's like, Achilles, I get that you and Agamemnon are on like rough terms. Let me and the Myrmidons go out there and just push these Trojans back, because they need some help. And so Achilles is like, yeah, sure, fine. Here, Patroclus, take my armor, get out there and do your thing. And so Patroclus does, and he just goes ballistic. Like, we see some cool fights with like Ajax and Odysseus, and especially Diomedes is constantly doing crazy things in battle. But when Patroclus gets out there, he's just killing dudes left, right, and center. So the Myrmidons, Patroclus, they are fresh to the fight. They push the Trojans all the way back to the wall. But Patroclus tries to actually fight Hector one-on-one, which he should not have done. He kind of took his luck too far, and so Patroclus dies at the hands of Hector. Now, we have had 1v1 fights before. Near the start of this, we have Menelaus, who is the husband of Helen, and Alexander, who is the one who had stolen Helen, coming down and fighting it out and being like, look, we've been fighting for 9 years. Let's just have a 1v1. Whoever wins gets Helen. The others will go home. We're done. And of course, that ends in sort of a stalemate, because Menelaus wins, but the gods pull Alexander away so that he doesn't die. Later on, the same thing happens. I think it was Ajax is fighting Hector 1v1, and same thing, Hector gets pulled away at the last second. But back to Patroclus. So Patroclus has died, and exulting in this, this. They've killed the mighty Patroclus after he's killed the mighty Sarpedon, by the way, one of the great Trojan dudes. Then Hector and the Trojans just roll back over the Achaeans and push them all the way back. And one of them sends a messenger out to Achilles. And when Achilles finds this out, he is super, super distraught. To me, this is the real anger of Achilles, or rage. He cries to his mom, I don't even have armor to go fight because I gave it to Patroclus. By the way, Hector has stripped Patroclus of Achilles' armor and is now strutting around wearing Achilles' armor. And his mom goes to Hephaestus and gets the god to make some super awesome mega armor and gives it to Achilles. And then Achilles goes out, and you thought Patroclus was bringing it. Well, Achilles just brings it times 10. He is the sort of ultimate fighter and just decimates everyone. Finally chases them all back inside the walls of Troy, except for Hector, who, because of fate and destiny, stays behind. And then he sees Achilles running at him, and he takes off running. Hector just bolts and Achilles is chasing him around. It's not like an epic fight that you might see. I'm going to have to watch the film Troy again. It's been years. But when Hector first sees Achilles, he's booking it. And until he finally gives up, Achilles has been chasing him for so long. Actually, one of the gods, I think it was Athena, comes down in the form of one of Hector's brothers and says, hey, stop running. Let's take Achilles down together. So he's like, oh, bro, yeah, you got my back. Let's fight. And then he turns around and his bro's gone. He has to fight Achilles 1v1. And of course, it's not really a long battle. Achilles just straight up kills Hector. And then he takes Hector, ties him to his chariot, and runs around the city with him, dragging the corpse all over the place. Drives it back to where the ships are, drives it around Patroclus's funeral pyre. But the gods make it so that Hector's body doesn't rot or isn't torn up by this. But Achilles is he's raging, right? He says to Hector as he's killing him, I'm not going to give your body back to your family. I'm going to feed it to the dogs. He even says that he wishes that he could chop it up and eat it raw like a cannibal. Achilles also promises Patroclus, after he's died, that he's going to capture 12 of the young Trojans and offer them as human sacrifices at his funeral, which he does. He actually sacrifices humans on this funeral pyre for Patroclus. But yes, our great hero Hector has died, and all of Troy is weeping. His wife Andromache, which there's a beautiful scene near the start, one of my favorite scenes, where Hector goes into the city and he goes in and sees his wife, and they have this chat, and she's like, I don't want to have to see you die. Can we stop this war? And he's like, well, I don't want to have to see you sold into slavery. To me, that would be way worse than me dying. That could happen to you after you die. And he picks up his son, and he's playing with this kid. It's just this beautiful, very real human moment we have with Hector and his wife and his son. That it's a great scene. But yeah, of course, now they're all distraught and they don't even get his body to bury. We have the funeral up for Patroclus, where it gives us a look into ancient Greek or late Bronze Age funerals, where after the funeral takes place, Achilles hauls out a bunch of Patroclus's stuff. I think it is, maybe some of his stuff, sets it up as prizes for games, and they have sort of funeral games like chariot races, foot races, boxing matches, wrestling matches, archery, stuff that sort of, I imagine, is what became later the Olympic Games, right? And then the gods intervene and manage to convince Achilles to ransom Hector's body. And so Hector's father comes and manages to get Hector's body taken back. And it's taken back into Troy, and they have a sort of a 12-day truce that Achilles is convinced to put up with. And then they bury the body of Hector. And that's how it ends. Now, it's hinted this whole time that Achilles is going to die soon after this. Achilles is not going to live long. He is fated to die, but that doesn't happen in this. Troy does not fall in this. It ends with the burial of Hector. So really, the story of the Iliad is the story of Achilles and Hector. And yeah, that's it. That's the plot of it. It was a really great read. I actually really enjoyed reading it, and the sort of the epithets that all the different characters get named, like godlike Achilles and Odysseus of the cunning mind and fleet-footed Diomedes and gray-eyed Athena, and sort of a lot of the repetition, because it is a song, right? It just had such a great flow to it. Even in this translation, which is still in verse, but it didn't try to follow the metrical flow. It just tried to give as accurate a translation of the content as possible. It very much felt like, I don't want to say it felt like an epic poem, because it is, but with the metaphors and everything, it was very visual. And yeah, I'm glad I finally got to read it. So that is Homer's The Iliad.